I have enjoyed your work for many years in jazz, but you've had, you're like a lot of artists, especially here in California, who have performed in many different genres. You've done pop and rock. You were part of a rock band, Giant, and wrote a big hit for that band. But what is it about jazz that keeps you coming back to this music?
It's the music that I was first intrigued by when I was a little kid. Yeah, my mom and dad took me to, I grew up in New Jersey. My mom and dad took me to the Steel Pier in Atlantic City, and Buddy Rich's big band was playing. And I heard a big band and for the first time, and heard Buddy, of course, and I just thought it was so exciting. And I think I even got his autograph. I think he just kind of like, kind of pushed me out of the way after he. Sorry, buddy. Yeah, I never forgot just that, that excitement. It looked like everybody was having such a great time in the band, and it kind of hooked me. I came from a musical family. My father is a bassist, and my brother also a pianist. So it was kind of a natural segue for me.
Yeah, national path to follow.
Yeah.
But, there is nothing more exciting, I think, than seeing a big band in person, especially
Yeah.
for the first time. It's really thrilling.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, you're from New Jersey. We were talking about that earlier. And I'm from New York, originally lived in New Jersey for
Yeah.
many years.
Yeah.
But another thing that we have in common is Boston. You went to school in Boston.
I did go to school in Boston.
Yeah, I went to BU, and you were at...
I was at New England Conservatory, and that was my really formative musical years.
Mm-hmm.
First 2 years, I was at Indiana University in Bloomington. 1 year, Peter Erskine, my partner in crime and a great friend and world-class drummer, we were roommates together at IU. Pete went on the road with Stan Kenton. I moved to Boston to study with Jackie Byard and Thad Jones and George Russell.
Yeah,
and
yeah. I think we must have been there around the same time in the 70s.
72, 73, 74.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed. I was
Great-
there at the same time.
Great time to be in
And
Boston.
I did know a lot of musicians back then, and they used to talk about Jackie McLean. I mean, not Jackie McLean, Jackie Byard. He was someone who was really very influential to a lot of the students who went to New England Conservatory.
Yeah.
So, did he give you any particular lessons that stay with you?
He was a very funny guy, but he was a family man, total family man. I met him, I bumped into him. He was leaving the school, and I was going into the school to meet a friend, and I recognized him. We started talking, and the next thing I know, I'm in his office. There's 2 pianos in there, and we're playing rhythm changes. And he said, well, what are you doing in the fall? And I said, well, I'm going back to IU. And he said, well, who's your piano teacher? And I said, I don't really have one. And he said, well, why don't you move to Boston and we'll transfer you and come and study with me. So he really took it upon himself to, help me do that.
Mm-hmm.
We have to do juries every semester at the end of our private lesson. We have this thing called a jury, which is like a little mini recital for our teachers and faculty.
You're talking about now teaching at USC.
And at NEC when I was a student.
Yes, okay.
And I still have it. So I saved it. The teachers always write comment sheets. And his comment to me this particular semester was, watch out for the funny gigs. And your left hand needs improvement.
Okay.
Yeah, I loved him. He was like
he was a character. He was somebody
beautiful
who was
man.
a very individual person.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I also heard that Joe Williams was a mentor of yours. Is that right?
Joe, yeah. I mean, I got to do 10 nights at the Playboy Club with Joe Williams and Alan Dawson, and I was just out of college, and Joe really he took me under his wing for those 10 nights, and in a short amount of time really mentored me and taught me a lot about life. After one of the nights, he said, hey, Alan, we're going to go down to Chinatown and get a bite to eat. Do you want to join us? And I was like, well, okay. So then I was living in Jamaica Plain. I said, I got to go home to my apartment, drop some stuff off, and then I'll come down. And I did that and found the restaurant. And when I walked in, it was a big round table, and Joe was facing the door. And when he saw me, he stopped in the middle of his conversation and stood up and came over to me and He was a big guy and just gave me this giant bear hug. And I'm like, what did I do, man? And he said, you showed up. And I never forgot that. And he said, you kept your word, man. And you know, just a life's lesson like that, you know.
It's
So
important
so
in business to keep
fantastic,
your word.
yeah.
Well, one of your first major gigs was with Tony Williams, right?
Yes.
How did that come about?
That happened because George Russell, my hero, he wrote this fabulous music theory book called The Lydian Chromatic Concept of Tonal Organization. And he taught that at NEC. And I was in his class for 2 years. And for 2 years, I had absolutely no idea what was going on. But I knew that I had to be there. I knew it was like, I just got to show up, you know, and, you know, years down the road, some of of George's knowledge kind of, you know, sprouted. But he wrote a suite of music. He was commissioned to write a suite called Living Time. It was for 2 small big bands and the Bill Evans Trio. It was recorded on Columbia Records. It's out of print now, but it's fabulous. It's a 8 suite piece. And I got to play one of the keyboard chairs in it. And at the end of the semester, George rehearsed our big band at NEC. And he said, fellas, I'm going to be doing this at Carnegie Hall in New York in 2 months, and I'm going to bring some of you with me to play for the concert. And I was one of the lucky guys. And I get to Carnegie Hall with my electric piano and clavinet, and I asked the stagehand, you know, where do you want me to set up? And he said, right behind those big yellow drums. And I knew Tony Williams was on the record of Living Time, but I didn't know he was going to be on the live gig. And I also didn't know that he was in the middle of putting one of his Tony Williams lifetimes together. And I didn't know that Alan Holsworth was in the audience. He had already found Alan, and they were looking for a keyboard player. So I played the gig, which was so much fun. Then I drove my Ford Pinto wagon back up to Cape Cod, where I was living in the wintertime. Yeah, lime green. And I came back one day, and my roommate said, guess who called? And I said, and he said, it's written down there, and it's Tony Williams with this number. And I was like, get out. He said, yeah, call him. And he said, I'm putting a band together. Do you want to come down to New York and do some playing? And I said, yeah, when? He said, now. So I packed my bags and loaded my car and met Tony, and we played together for about 2.5 years, 3 years.
And playing with a drummer like Tony Williams, such a powerful drummer, did that affect the way that you played the piano?
Yeah, I mean, the band was a powerhouse.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very, very loud fusion band. And I would, you know, we were traveling around in station wagons and what have you to do our U.S. tour. And I would always ask him, Tony, can we please play something just, you know, swinging, something straight ahead? And he was like, never, man, it'll never happen. You know, so one night, I don't know where it was. Might have been Santa Monica Civic, which was our last gig. I don't think it was there, but in the middle of my solo, he broke into his, you know, famous Tony Williams swing, straight ahead thing. And I was so shocked that I just looked over at him, and he looked at me, and then he just stopped playing. And then just went right back to just bashing. He was quite a character.
Yeah. Well, you also worked with one of the most iconic figures in the music industry, that gentleman right up there, Bob Dylan.
Yes.
And how did that gig come about?
Well, I was in New York rehearsing with my very first pop gig, Eddie Money, may he rest in peace. Mm-hmm. And Bruce Botnick, who produced the Tony Williams records and who also produced a lot of the Doors records, and he's an iconic engineer-producer, called me when I first moved to LA, and I started working with Eddie, and we were in New York rehearsing, and I met on a break in the hallway a guy named Rob Stoner, who was Bob's bass player. And, what are you doing here? Da, da, da. And where are you going? Oh, I live in Santa Monica. Oh, I'm going to be in Santa Monica putting Bob's band together for a, upcoming tour. Give me your number. I'll call you, when I get into town. So I gave him my number. I didn't think twice about it. And then I went on a 3-month grueling, one-nighter tour with Eddie, and got home a couple days before Christmas and just was sitting on my couch like, okay, let me decompress. And the phone rang, and it was Rob Stoner. And he said, hey, Alan, I'm just a mile away on Main Street and Strand in Santa Monica at Bob's rehearsal studio. Can you come down tomorrow? I want to put a tape together. And I told him, I said, man, I'm so tired, I'm going to pass. And he went, oh, okay. And then he hung up the phone, and I'm sitting there. And I was like, what did I just do? So I called him right back immediately and went down, and we played together, and he put this little tape together. And then auditions started. I was invited to audition, and after a lot of different rounds, I was the last keyboard player standing.
Okay.
So, and we went on a world tour of Asia and Europe and the United States.
And you made a couple of records with him, too.
1978, yeah. We did Street Legal, and then we did Live at the Budokan.
And then, some 40 years later, you get a call again to work with him again, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, 2 calls in that same year. One from Don was to do a compilation that Bob was a part of for the LGBTQ community, and he sang He's Funny That Way. And Vince Mendoza arranged it, this fabulous arrangement. We cut it at Capitol. And then a few months after, a call from Bob's manager looking for some solo piano musings, and he didn't really want to tell me much, and I just kind of pinned him down, and I said, what is this for? And he said, well, Bob won the Nobel Prize, as you know, and he has to, his acceptance speech is due tomorrow at 12 noon or whatever it was, and he wants piano music under it. So he gave me a couple of prompts, like, do you remember Steve Allen sitting at the piano playing? I said, yeah. He said, yeah, so I just went into my studio and started recording 30 minutes of random, just kind of sparse piano stuff. And Bob liked it, so it got attached to his Nobel acceptance speech. And then somehow, one of the guys from the New York Times found out about it and called me and said, is it okay if we do an article on you about this? And I was like, God, that'd be fantastic. So we did the article. And then half an hour later, I got a call from Bob's manager. He said, if anybody calls you about this, you don't know anything. And I said, whoops.
Too late.
Little too late, man.
Well, you've had such an interesting career. We don't have time to talk about so much of it right now, but you've worked with a lot of great people like Ray Charles and Santana and Aretha Franklin and so many wonderful artists, and also working in the film industry, composing. And one of the things that you co-wrote was the theme for the CBS News. How does that melody go now? Yeah, that's it.
It had 2 6-year runs, two separate runs. It was the first music that CBS ever used for their news program. And
right?
Myself and 2 friends, we wrote a lot of music for commercials, and they got the call to pitch a musical idea to CBS for the news theme, and they liked what we wrote.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And it's always those very simple melodies, but they just stay in your head, and you always will, whenever you hear it years from now, you'll identify it with the CBS News or whatever you write it for, whatever it's associated with.
Yeah.
So that's fantastic. And you've also written, for Disney movies and other...
and some HBO stuff, and for my jazz groups and...
Yeah. Well, you have the latest album is a solo album, right?
Solo record,
okay.
Yep.
All right, Soliloquy. But you have a wonderful trio with you this evening. Are these gentlemen that
do.
you've had a long relationship with?
Yeah, Dark and I go back, I don't know. Dark, how many years now? 20 years.
20 years,
And Connor, probably about 5 or so. And it's you know, I love playing with these guys.
Yeah.
I love playing with these guys
Well,
so
we
much.
love hearing you. We're anxious to hear the music. So thank you once again, Alan Pasqua, for taking a few minutes
Thanks,
to
Rhonda.
talk with us.
Thank you all.
Let's hear it again for Alan Pasqua.